Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie. And in this video, I'm going to be looking at the weekend of March the 21st and 22nd, 2026. And I will begin by just looking at what is going on astrologically over the course of this weekend, and then I will do readings for the 12 signs, and I will finish with a look at the I Ching for the weekend. So let's start with the weekend overall. So here is a chart set for midnight on March the 22nd, 2026, the beginning of a weekend, New York time. And so as far as what's going on, you can see that the moon is in Taurus, the middle of a weekend. And for most of us, it's going to be a moon in Taurus weekend. So the moon moves into Taurus on Saturday morning, London time, at 6:35, so really quite early in the morning in Europe and Africa. If you're in the Americas, very, very early on Saturday, even into on Friday, the moon moves into Taurus. So, by and large, we can regard it as being a moon in Taurus weekend, and I think that that is good. Because recently there has not been a great deal of Earth in the sky. I mean, we've had Uranus in Taurus, but aside from that, every now and then, of course, the moon goes into an Earth sign. But there have been periods of days where there's just been no Earth except for Uranus, and now having the moon in Taurus, that might give us, a degree of grounding. And I think we need that grounding. So, over the last few days, it has been rather chaotic. We've had we've had a new moon. We've had Mercury going stationary direct. We've also had the equinox. So, things have been changing, and a lot of us just don't know where it's all going. There's so much instability around us. Okay, a lot of it is focused on the war in the Gulf. Is this the beginning of the Third World War? I don't think it is, but everyone is nervous. Everyone is nervous about the economy. Yeah, there's so much to worry about. And so having the moon in Taurus this weekend is grounding. We need some Earth, and we are certainly getting some Earth. And I think that's really, really going to help. And the moon in Taurus, it makes a lot of very sort of useful aspects. On Saturday the moon is it makes a square to Pluto. So that's the first aspect that happens when the moon moves into Taurus. And of course, when you're talking about moon square Pluto, that can be a bit heavy. It might actually begin sort of add to our fears. Moon square Pluto, where is this all going? That's a big question, isn't it? Where is it all going? And it's all just so intense, and we can't stand it. And then the moon moves on, and the moon makes sextile to Mercury, sextile to the North Node on Saturday. Then on Sunday it makes a sextile to Jupiter, sextile to Mars. So those lunar aspects, in the end, I think become quite fortunate. They get things moving, and they perhaps give us a feeling of optimism. Moon sextile Mercury. That's a great aspect to have on Saturday. The moon and Mercury are the two communication planets. The moon is about communicating from our heart. The Mercury communicating with our mind. And so when they're coming together in a sextile, it just could be just about easy communication, and it's not about just talking a lot. It's also about listening. I mean, the Mercury is in Pisces, Moon is in Taurus. These are not noisy signs, Taurus and Pisces. They are quite reflective, and so through listening, we are also communicating. And then the moon moves on. On Sunday, we've got moon making a sextile to Mars, sextile to Jupiter, and of course Mars and Jupiter are in trine. Now, I talked about Mars trine Jupiter in some detail when I did my video for Friday, and I'm not entirely convinced that this Mars trine Jupiter is going to be entirely positive. Mars is it's a high energy planet. It's also a planet of war. So if you have got Mars trine Jupiter, that is a temptation to attack, to blow things up. That's how Mars Jupiter can work. And just because it's a trine, what does that mean? It means it's easy to do. So you could say that if you blow something up with Mars trine Jupiter ensures that the explosion causes maximum damage. That's how Jupiter can work. So we should not necessarily be excited about Mars trine Jupiter. We should be quite fearful, especially from a geopolitical point of view. On the other hand, from an individual perspective, having this Mars trine Jupiter just might be that we can do more things. We can take successful action because, as I keep saying, as individuals, we have a lot more freedom from nations. As individuals, we can choose how to use Mars trine Jupiter, and I think choice does matter. We've got the symbolism of Mars trine Jupiter, high energy, so we can decide how we're going to use this high energy aspect. We might want to use it in something that is completely safe, something that we enjoy doing, something we're good at doing, something perhaps that we have some expertise in. So we're using that energy constructively. On the other hand, if we want to do something crazy with Mars trine Jupiter, I don't know, like racing one's car at 150 miles an hour, well, yeah, that would be asking for trouble, wouldn't it? I mean, obviously. And this kind of indicates that there is always a choice. So we know that there's a Mars trine Jupiter over the weekend. We know how it can manifest. And we know it can be difficult. And as I said on Friday, the Mars-Jupiter midpoint is around 15 Taurus. It's still 15 Taurus, just over. And Taurus, 15 Taurus is 45 degrees from the Aries point. So the Aries point is the world point. It is about what's happening on this planet. So with Mars trine Jupiter, Aries on the Mars semi-square, the Mars-Jupiter midpoint, well, bad things could happen geopolitically. Especially when we know that we're in a war zone. Sorry, we're not geographically in a war zone. In a time sense, we're in a war zone because we know this is a time where we've got the this war in the Gulf, and very often it seems to be weekends that people like to do their big attacks, isn't it? I think that it isn't said that Trump, when they started that invasion of. Not the invasion, the bombing of Iran at the end of February. He did it over the weekend because he didn't want to upset the markets. Maybe there's going to be the same logic when someone tries a spectacular. I don't think the Iranians care too much about upsetting the markets. So that is certainly an aspect that that we really do need to think about. And while all this is happening, the Sun is conjunct Neptune. Now, on a personal level, Sun conjunct Neptune can be something that is really, very, very confusing. I mean, it can be. We don't know. We don't necessarily know what's going on, but it can be an aspect that is quite spiritual. I mean, Neptune is a spirit, is a spiritual planet. So the Sun in Aries, this is where we want to assert ourselves. Sun conjunct Neptune, we focus on something of a spiritual nature, meditation, prayer, going to religious services, whatever it is. Neptune is an ideal. It's a philosophy, something we want to give into, surrender to. I mean, that can be a good thing or a bad thing, but something beyond ourselves, which kind of sort of dissolves the sun. Now, Neptune is also, of course, the planet of oil. And so oil prices are very high. I don't think quite as high as they used to be, but you could say that given we have a potential oil crisis with the Straits of Hormuz and all of this kind of stuff, having Sun-Neptune conjunction while all this is going on is maybe something to be slightly worried about, but perhaps we've had it all. I mean, that's the thing. That's a problem about making forecasts about violence in the Middle East, because it's all there. I mean, every day is violent in the Middle East. Every hour is violent. So, nothing I say can really sound very useful. I mean, I know that people are thinking about peace. Doesn't seem that is, especially on the table. I mean, short term. We do need to think about that Sun conjunct Saturn. The Sun conjunct Saturn is coming up in a few days' time. There was a suggested association between the Sun-Saturn cycle and peace talks. I think that there was a book on mundane astrology by Charles Harvey, Michael Bajan, and Nick Campion, which I think talked about the Sun-Saturn cycle and peace. I mean, maybe I'll look at that in a few days' time, when I consider the Sun-Saturn conjunction. So that's something that we might want to think about, quite soon. So as far as other things are concerned, there is the heliocentric view, and I do like to look at the heliocentric picture. And so heliocentrically, there is a huge amount going on. But before I do the heliocentric picture, I just want to look at the horoscope for Sydney, Australia. So if we set the chart for Sydney, Australia, we see that at midnight, in the middle of the weekend, the moon is at 3 degrees Taurus. And, that is a reminder that if you are in Australia or New Zealand, for the first half of the weekend, for most of Saturday, the moon is still moving through Aries, and it's not really till Saturday evening and into Sunday that the moon is the moon is in Taurus. And the heliocentric picture. So here is the heliocentric chart. Remember, this is putting the sun at the center of the solar system, and this heliocentric chart is, I think, quite dramatic. It's been becoming dramatic, but the thing about this heliocentric chart is that we have got a grand trine. We've got 2 grand trines this weekend, because we've got a grand trine involving geocentrically. We've got a grand trine involving Mars, Jupiter, and true black moon Lilith. That may talk about the darkness of this weekend, but this heliocentric trine is Earth, Pluto, Uranus, making this grand trine, and then you've got Neptune making the opposition. So you've got Earth opposition Neptune, Earth opposition Saturn, you've got Neptune sextile Pluto, you've got Neptune sextile Uranus. So it's all coming together. And so when you've got a grand trine heliocentrically, I think this is more geopolitical rather than individual. So this grand trine, Uranus and Pluto, really trying to transform the situation. Uranus and Pluto through something dramatic and explosive, and then the Earth is poor Earth is opposition Saturn, opposition Neptune, trine Uranus, trine Pluto. So what's happening on Earth, I think, is really difficult. over the weekend. Again, I'm talking about it from a collective view. I'm not necessarily talking about how we experience it as an individual. So this might suggest that over the weekend there could be a surprising turn in the Gulf War, or it could represent something happening somewhere else, some other conflict spot, Ukraine, Russia, or maybe some part of the world which is not yet in the news. Anyway, it's now time to turn my attention to the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for the weekend of March the 21st and 22nd, 2026. Aries. There is a lot of action this weekend thanks to a trine between Mars and Jupiter. So this Mars-Jupiter trine has been building up for the last few days, and now it is exact. So this Mars-Jupiter trine, it is quite sort of energetic, and you might feel that you want to do something with your energy. Anything maybe, just at least do something to make yourself active. But you don't want to exaggerate. You don't have to be doing everything all at once. And perhaps with this Mars Jupiter trine, you should be focusing on something fairly low key. You don't have to get a load of attention. I mean, still, you've got energy. You've got to do something with it, and I would, suggest that you keep it simple. You decide, what matters, right now, and I don't think you necessarily have to do anything over the weekend. At least nothing in a sort of a dramatic and a public sense. So, just decide what you need to do, and don't court attention unnecessarily. And while this is happening, the Sun is making a conjunction to Neptune, you could say. In fact, that the Sun-Neptune conjunction is the main aspect of the weekend. I think it's a Mars trine Jupiter, but still, this Sun-Neptune conjunction is in Aries. It is in your sign. Now, this Sun-Neptune conjunction will be, particularly powerful if you're an early Aries. So, for example, if your ascendant is, if your reading is from a perspective of the rising signs, if your ascendant is, say, less than 5 degrees Aries, or if you're born maybe before, before the 26th, 27th of March, if you're looking at these star forecasts from a perspective of the Sun. So, if you are earlier in the sign, it's going to be more intense. But regardless of when you're born, what kind of Aries you are, I think that the Sun-Neptune conjunction, it does potentially create a bit of confusion. You may not be entirely sure about what you are doing, and part of it is that you are still trying to get used to Neptune moving through Aries. It is at first quite difficult having Neptune moving through Aries. I mean, Neptune is a collective planet, and when it's moving through your sign, it kind of puts the focus on you, but you may not be entirely sure how. As I've said on numerous occasions, Neptune in Aries can represent leadership. It can represent other people's desire for leadership. I mean, the example I like to use, is the German Chancellor Bismarck, who was an Aries, and he really came into prominence. His political career really started to take off when Neptune was in Aries. In other words, when Neptune moved into his sun sign. So you don't have to do everything at once, and your own judgment is not always going to be crystal clear. I mean, you have a judgment. I think you're able to make some important judgments, but the kind of judgments that lead to an immediate decision or immediate action, it should probably be avoided because you don't quite know, where it's all going to lead. Instead, you should perhaps sort of just take it all in and perhaps nurture the reflective side to your personality. Reflection means just being aware of everything, and it's not just what's in front of you, what you're thinking about. It could be like you have sort of moments where you almost stand outside yourself and you start to see things in a new perspective, and it is important to have this awareness. The Aries season is starting now that the sun is in Aries. We've had the equinox, and the Aries season. It's not just about the sun moving through Aries. We've in around a fortnight. What is it? April the 10th? No, a bit over a fortnight. Around April the 10th, we've got Mars moving into Aries. Of course, Mars is your ruler. So the Aries season, one way or another, is going to roll on, for quite a long time. So I don't think there's any need to be in a desperate hurry. You will have time, and I think over the weekend, to a great extent, it's a time for alignment, or sort of perhaps realignment, and because there's a lot to take on board. There's a lot to consider. There are still things you're getting familiar with, and just keep it simple. And there is that Mars trine Jupiter. Yeah, as I've said, it's a lot of energy. You do have a lot of energy, but ideally use that energy to sort of boost your security, to just focus maybe on quite mundane tasks. You don't have to do anything overly dramatic over the weekend. Taurus, the moon is moving into your sign, and I think that moon moving into Taurus is something that I would regard as being entirely positive. The moon makes some interesting aspects. On Saturday, the moon is making a square to Pluto, and I think that square to Pluto is very empowering. It might sound a bit difficult, moon square Pluto, but it's an aspect that you're in control of, and it highlights what is important to you, what you need to do, what you need to get off the ground. Indeed, what you need to be obsessed about. If you think about Taurus, Taurus is a fixed sign. Every Taurus has the capability of getting obsessed about something. It's fixed. You decide on something, and you want to give it everything you've got. You really do. And so what is it? What is your number one priority? Decide on that number one priority. Don't think, oh, it's just because it's a weekend you can relax. No, there's something that really is important to you. And on Saturday with that moon square Pluto, really think about it. And if you feel you want to give it everything, then I would suggest that that's what you do. I mean, you don't want to completely overdo it. You don't want to do anything dangerous. But if something matters, perhaps it's something that's hanging over from earlier in the week, and you want to sort it out. And then as you move into Sunday, the moon makes a sextile to Jupiter, makes a sextile to Mars at a time when there is a trine between Mars and Jupiter. So Mars in Pisces is trine Jupiter in Cancer, and that I think allows you to take the initiative and perhaps to be quite forward. Being very clear about who you are. Especially in a social environment. So if you're going to a party or you're meeting people, I think that you can get a lot of attention. You can maybe be even, the life and soul of a party in that Taurean kind of way. There's something you have to offer. There's something you can offer. And a lot of people are feeling uncertain. Don't forget, but one aspect we have this weekend is a conjunction between the Sun and Neptune, and the Sun is actually moving on towards a conjunction of Saturn. Those aspects do not impact you directly, but they might mean that other people are not feeling, 100%. They may not be quite sure, where it's all going, and I think that you can really perhaps take advantage of the situation. If other people are not sure of themselves, if other people are confused, and you, by contrast, can be very definite and can be the one forcing the pace, I think that would be, very much appreciated. But the question is, how much do you want to force the pace? You probably can force the pace as much as you like. I said at the beginning of this piece on Taurus that there is something you want to happen, I think, something you regard as being important. You want to give it everything. And maybe other people are involved in that. Maybe you want other people to do particular things to help you reach your destination. And if there is a feeling of hurry, that you want to get things done, well, you can be quite forceful. You can be, if you really want, be almost destructively forceful. Now, being destructively forceful, okay, you don't want to cause destruction. On the other hand, maybe a lot of energy is required. You perhaps take the view that there's something that is difficult but needs everything you've got, and if you can give it everything you've got. Okay, it might not always be pleasant, but you can actually have some kind of breakthrough over the weekend. Yeah, a breakthrough that could be exhausting, but I think that it is a real possibility. Gemini. Now Mercury is direct. It's going very slowly though, because it turned direct on Friday, but it's happened. It is incrementally moving forward, and of course it will get faster and faster. So this weekend, Gemini, you might feel a certain amount of clarity. Things or at least increasing clarity. Now you feel that you can really start to literally move forward. I mean, Mercury is moving forward, so you can move forward. And Mercury is conjunct the North Node, and so it is a time to keep going and to think about maybe what you have been missing, and aligning yourself for the new week, which is almost the last week of March. I mean, March is a long month, but sort of March is kind of coming to an end, isn't it? It's going to be Easter soon, isn't it? Easter, I think Easter's April the 5th. Anyway, so you might feel that you want to make up for lost time, because there potentially has been a bit of a lost time over the last few weeks, and there were perhaps opportunities which were available, and you thought you'd missed them, and now you can get things back on the road. And Mercury's conjunction to the North Node it really does indicate that if you feel that something needs to be done, if you need to project yourself, if you need to be ambitious, then then go ahead, and you can do it in your own way. Sometimes Geminis like to get attention. They like to be listened to. Maybe it feeds their ego. And I'm saying this as a Gemini myself, with my sun in Gemini. I always have to say that, I'm a sun in Gemini, because particularly if I'm saying something ever so slightly negative to Geminis, I don't want you to think I'm prejudiced against Geminis, because I am a Gemini myself. But you don't have to do everything in a public setting, and I think that there is a place for doing things in a way that is quite secretive. It's not that you're trying to deceive anyone or hide anything. It's just that sometimes things work best when they're not talked about. And you definitely have ideas. You definitely know what needs to be done. And so that might say something about the weekend. And, okay, beginning of next week, end of the weekend. No, I think it's the beginning of next week. The moon will be in Gemini. So, when the moon moves into Gemini, that might be a signal to really make your views public. Be more open about what you're trying to achieve. But for the moment, I don't think that you need to push things. And perhaps it's a good time to be aware of, or become aware of, the reasons why you might not have been successful as you would have liked to in the past. And perhaps you'll come across things which you don't feel entirely comfortable with, that you don't like the look of. They might even worry you, but you think about them and you analyze them in your mind. And in the process of that, you do start to make real progress. And so, just because no one knows what you're doing doesn't mean that you can't be successful. And an aspect that is exact over the weekend is a trine between Mars and Jupiter. So you've got Mars is in Pisces, Jupiter is in Cancer. This Mars-Jupiter trine, it sounds quite energetic, but from a Gemini viewpoint, it can actually be quite practical. It is about thinking about, what you would like to do. If you're doing anything connected with work or your career, I think this Mars trine Jupiter allows you to be very successful in your own way. I mean, I don't know how successful you can be on a Sunday, but you can certainly set things up, and maybe that's what's happening. You can set yourself up and prepare for the new week. And it might require quite a lot of action on your part, but again, it's action that I don't think needs to be in the public eye. Now, as far as relationships are concerned, I always have to say something about relationships. It may not be, such a bad weekend. It's okay. It's not that you're feeling wildly sociable. I don't think you are. But if you are able to be with people, I think that you can be quite effective. Okay, the moon might square Pluto, but it also makes a sextile to Mercury. So the moon is making a sextile to your ruler. So with moon sextile Mercury, you come over as someone who is pretty sympathetic and understanding. It's quite easy, and at the same time, you do know how to get on with people, and in quite a quiet, low-profile way, and you know how to get people moving. You know what to say. You know what to do. And I think that you can certainly benefit from the right kind of company. Cancer. Things are looking quite good, Cancer. I mean, the moon is moving through Taurus. It's moving into Taurus. I think it moves into Taurus actually at around, 6:35 a.m. on Saturday morning. London time, so much earlier if you're in the Americas. If you're in Australia or New Zealand, then what would that be? Sort of, I don't know, late afternoon, early evening that the moon would go into Taurus. So that's kind of a good place for the moon to be from a Cancerian perspective. I mean, the moon is exalted in Taurus, and one aspect it makes is a sextile to Mercury. So that moon sextile Mercury means that you're feeling good about yourself, and you're feeling generally quite positive. I mean, you know that nothing is entirely simple. I mean, the moon does make a square to Pluto on Saturday, so there just might be certain things that you don't fully understand, and that might relate to other people. I mean, yes, you can be sociable, but yeah, not everyone is going to be entirely straightforward, especially on Saturday, and you might just have a feeling either that something is being hidden from you, or perhaps there's something that you want to hide. You can't be entirely open. I mean, after all, you are a Cancerian, and you know the importance of discretion. Now, probably the most important aspect of a weekend is a trine between Mars and Jupiter. And Jupiter, of course, is moving through your sign. It's in Cancer, and Mars is moving through Pisces. And I think that this Mars trine Jupiter is an aspect that can be about action. That is one way of looking at it. What do you want to do? Yes, you can do it if there's something that's important to you and you want to have a busy weekend. You can certainly have a busy weekend. But the Mars trine Jupiter could be quite spiritual in its own way. It can be about putting energy into transcendence, into moving beyond your everyday mundane reality. I mean, that is possible. I'm not saying your reality is mundane. I'm just saying that you can perhaps sort of move to a new level and think about things, in a different way. And this is a lot of how, the last few months, certainly the last month, has been unfolding for many Cancerians. They have been challenged to think about what their underlying philosophy is, how it relates to what you're actually experiencing, in the real world. And it's not always clear, and you sometimes wonder about your beliefs and where they're going. But with this Mars trine Jupiter, you start to get a feeling of how you can be aligned, and really what is important to you and what you need to reach towards. So when we're talking about reaching towards, let's think back to Jupiter in Cancer. Of course, Jupiter has been in your sign for a long time, since last summer. And one way of looking at Jupiter in Cancer is to say that the divine, the supernatural, that which does not die is with you. It's very much part of your existence. And that might be obvious, but it's something is with you. Something is by your side, and is making sure that nothing bad happens. And perhaps with Mars trine Jupiter, you start to get a feeling that there is something you can do, something you would like to do, but it isn't just about some conscious decision. It's almost like something beyond yourself is informing you, is telling you that there is something that you should be doing. Now, that is, of course, no reason to go crazy or to delude yourself. I mean, delusion is always a possibility. We can think about the chattering of the unconscious. Isn't that sort of Israel Regardie? He always warns about. I don't know if you've come across Israel Regardie. Israel Regardie, he was associated with the Golden Dawn, and he wrote some books on the occult. I think he might have been Aleister Crowley's secretary at one stage, and he was a Reichian therapist. And Israel Regardie, he gave this warning that the very first thing you need to do when you get into the occult is or when you get into some form of magical practice, I'm not advocating anything, by the way, but is that you need to go into psychotherapy. I mean, maybe he would say that because he was a psychotherapist, particularly a Reichian psychotherapist, But the reason he said this is that, there is the chattering of the unconscious. So when people get involved in spiritual, psychic, occult stuff, whatever that might mean, their unconscious starts chattering. They start to take what their unconscious is telling them, the garbage the unconscious can come up with, and treat it as being something divine and wonderful, and as evidence that their spiritual path is yielding fruit, when in fact it's just nonsense, and it could well be dangerous nonsense. So maybe that's something you need to be aware of. But I do think that this Mars trine Jupiter can be elevating, and you can find a way of separating the wheat from the chaff. I mean, the wheat from the chaff, but the chaff is the unconscious chattering. The wheat is what is real. What is that energy which is beyond yourself, at least beyond your material self, which is guiding you through. Leo. So Leo, we've got the sun is now in Aries, very much so. So this weekend, things have changed, and with the sun in Aries, I hope that you're feeling more dynamic, more capable, and more part of things. There have been times recently when Leos have felt rather separate, and they haven't really known what was going on. They were confused and they were cautious, and they didn't feel ready for anything. But now that the sun has moved into Aries, you feel the change. The sun is now in a fire sign. You are a fire sign because you're a Leo, whether you're Leo rising or you've got the sun in Leo or the moon in Leo, whatever. But the point is that now we've got the sun in Aries. That very much gives you a boost. It gives you dynamism, and it makes you just feel more aware. You're able to get a sense of perspective. So that's certainly good news. Now, the sun, when it moves into Aries, it does make a conjunction to Neptune. So this conjunction to Neptune, there is this question, is it a good thing or is it a bad thing? I mean, it could be both. I mean, one might see Sun conjunct Neptune as being a very confusing influence, especially if you're not aware of how it might work, if you're not particularly grounded. Now, with Sun conjunct Neptune, you should certainly avoid anything which dulls your awareness. So it goes without saying that this weekend you shouldn't be drinking, you shouldn't be taking recreational drugs. You have to take, if you've been prescribed a medicine, you have to take it, but you should not be taking any intoxicants, over the weekend with Sun conjunct Neptune. I mean, you shouldn't really take any intoxicants anyway, but particularly with the Sun conjunct Neptune. And at the same time, you should try to keep things simple, because Neptune is the planet of lies, or it can be a planet of lies. And so what you don't want to do, Leo, is tie yourself up in lies. Think about what you're saying. Think about what you're communicating. Do you want to be deceptive? And think about what other people are saying to you. It's easy for you to be deceived. Now, there will be a minority of Leos who are in the business of deceiving, not necessarily in a criminal way, not even in a necessarily an unethical way. Sometimes deception is part of the game. Depends, doesn't it? Or creating illusions. And that might lead to some of the positive aspects of Sun conjunct Neptune for a Leo. I mean, Sun conjunct Neptune can be very creative. It can be very imaginative. So, if you are an artist or a photographer, or you're doing something rather sort of otherworldly, smoke and mirrors, fine. I mean, then Sun conjunct Neptune, is good. If you are someone who, I don't know, if you're in Washington State, maybe with Sun conjunct Neptune or other part, because I think more and more states in America have decriminalized decriminalized marijuana, and there are marijuana shops. I mean, where I am in America, the city does not allow marijuana shops, but there is someone who is a marijuana shop owner, and he makes public comments. He thinks it's very important that the city should start to open marijuana shops, because it would be good for tax revenues. So I don't know if you want to think about, if you're in a state which allows, an American state which allows marijuana to be sold, and you might be thinking about opening a new marijuana shop with Sun conjunct Neptune. I mean, that's logical. Or selling alcohol, if that's your business. So I mean, you can use Neptune in a constructive way. So it's just important that if you want to be productive with this Sun Neptune conjunction, you use it properly, and you don't allow yourself to be distracted. So there is that question, Leo: is Neptune your friend, or is it your enemy? It can cause a lot of destruction, but used in the right areas, if you use the symbolism of Neptune in a constructive way, I think you can benefit from it. And of course, Neptune is a planet of spirituality, so you might say Sun conjunct Neptune in Aries, well, you might say it's as spiritual as it gets. So if you want to be actively spiritual over the weekend, then go ahead. And it doesn't matter what you do. Maybe you're an occasional churchgoer, and maybe this Sunday go to church. Even if you haven't been to church for years, go see what happens. If you're a Christian, or if you're a confirmed Christian, when did you last have a communion? I mean, maybe you should have the communion with the Sun conjunct Neptune. Some kind of spiritual or religious practice, would not do you any harm. And it might also say something about your dreams. Your dreams could be particularly vivid. So there is a lot that could happen of a productive nature with Sun conjunct Neptune. And when you're talking about an aspect like Sun conjunct Neptune, there may well be an element of choice. If you do nothing, then Sun Neptune conjunction could creep into your life in unexpected and perhaps undesirable ways. Alternatively, you could decide how you want Sun Neptune to manifest. You might say, I'm going to paint a picture. I'm going to go to church. Or go to whatever other, if it's Saturday, go to the synagogue, or whatever it is you might want to do. Do something of a spiritual nature, and actively go for it. And I think that might be a good way of utilizing this aspect. But Leo, I don't want to think that I don't want you to think that today is just about floating in the sky. Having spiritual revelations or whatever. The moon is in Taurus. The moon is now in an earth sign, and so with the moon in an earth sign, there is a practicality to this weekend. Perhaps that practicality has recently been lost, but now we've got a personal planet in an earth sign. That might mean that there's something very useful you can do. Perhaps you'll be spurred on by another person to do something practical that might well be related to career matters, for example, or the whole way in which you boost your status and you focus on your objectives. So don't completely float around this weekend, because I think that there is something very real and grounded that you can accomplish, or even just start to accomplish. It's perhaps a beginning of a process. And I know there's not a great deal of Earth around, but don't forget Venus is going to go into Taurus, at the end of the month. I think it's on March the 30th, and I think that's going to be good for Leos. But anyway, I'll talk about that when the time arrives. Virgo. So things are starting to move to some extent. I mean, things are speeding up. And of course, that is connected with Mercury going stationary direct. So throughout the weekend, Mercury is going forward, kind of. I mean, it's very slow. It's still moving at a snail's pace, but it is direct. The retrograde motion has finally come to an end, and that does mean that you're starting to see things in a different way. There's more scope for positive action, and it's not just about you. It's also about other people and other people's responses. Certain other people have not been particularly responsive. They have. They've held back. There's been indecision, but this weekend you might now start to see signs of life, and you yourself are going to be more positive and more optimistic, and you're going to be helped by the moon's movement into Taurus. So throughout the weekend, the moon is in Taurus. Okay. If you're in Australia or New Zealand, the moon might not move into Taurus until Saturday, late afternoon or early evening. But certainly if you're in Europe or America, the moon is moving into Taurus, well, even late Friday, very early Saturday. So it's there, and having a moon in Taurus, just things feel better. And the moon in Taurus, okay, it might make a square to Pluto, but it makes a sextile to Mercury. And so with that moon sextile Mercury, you're able to talk, and you're able to be excited, perhaps be excited about ideas. Things are moving. There is more positivity around, and you start to realize that there are many different ways of doing the same thing, and you can sort of move things to a new level, if you so wish. And then as the weekend gets underway, I think things do get better. The moon, okay, makes a sextile to Mercury, then it makes on Sunday, it makes a sextile to Jupiter, it makes a sextile to Mars, and you just might feel that everything is coming together. And you might have thought that certain doors were closed, but now it's becoming clear that is simply not the case. And this also sort of links back to what I was saying about other people. Other people are just going to be more forthcoming, more positive, and we've got Mars making a trine to Jupiter. So what's actually happening is that you've got a Mars-Jupiter trine, and the moon is sextiling both Mars and Jupiter. So moon is on the Mars-Jupiter midpoint, and that configuration, it has a social element to it, but it's just also about you being inspired by your environment, by the various contacts you have, and being taken to a new level. Now, that does mean that you should pick and choose. You don't want to spend your weekend with people who have a reputation for being boring and unimaginative. You want to spend the weekend as far as is possible with people who are interesting, who are exciting, who've got a new perspective. So you do have a certain choice, and this means Virgo, that through your social environment, you can take yourself to a new level, and you really start to benefit from Mercury's forward movement, or it's about to move forward. And Mercury, by the way, is conjunct the North Node, and so with Mercury conjunct the North Node, that does indicate that the path forward, short term, does relate to other people. You might feel fine on your own, but I think things could be just so much better if you're in contact with the right people who can can be inspiring, and I think such people are around. Okay, you don't have to meet them face to face. You can have contact in many different ways. So the best way of using this weekend is to be sociable, but to be sociable on your terms. Libra, we have the moon moving into Taurus. So with the moon moving into Taurus, that does create a bit of a change. Things are certainly changeable. And the question is, Libra, which way should you be going? There is evidence that you should be more of an extrovert, be more sociable, but you don't want to go all the way in one direction. And there is certainly a time for reflection. And we know with the moon in Taurus, you've got to make sure that you really do understand what is going on. You understand how things are unfolding, and it does occur to you that things may be slightly more complicated than you'd realized, and people may be more complicated than you realized, which is challenging, because you've just had the sun moving into Aries. So with the sun moving into your opposite sign, that does mean that the social side of things is important. It can't be ignored, but at the same time, you can't really take people at face value, because with the moon moving into Taurus, complications are coming to the surface. At least you are aware of the potential for complications, and the moon in Taurus, it does make a square to Pluto. So nothing is simple, and no one is entirely simple. And just because someone is not simple doesn't mean they should necessarily be avoided. But there is a conjunction between the Sun and Neptune, and the Sun and Neptune, this conjunction is taking place in Aries, is taking place in your opposite sign, and so it's probably not a good idea to take people at face value. They could be hiding something, not necessarily deliberately hiding something. It's just they're deciding not to reveal things, or they don't want to reveal things, or they can't reveal things. That is always possible. So this means that certainly when you're dealing with someone you don't really know very well, you absolutely should not make assumptions about who they are. They might be living under a smokescreen, and so trying to work out their next move, working out what their priorities are, it could be very difficult. So it's important not to try, and also just to consider the possibility that things are complicated. Assume they're complicated, and assume that if you want to get to the truth, it's going to be difficult, if not impossible. Now, I would have thought that the day probably gets, or the weekend gets easier maybe as it goes along, because we do have a trine between Mars and Jupiter. We have the moon is making a sextile to Mars and Jupiter, and those aspects, they really are positive, and what they're focusing on is Jupiter. Now, Jupiter is in Cancer, as I keep saying, but I have to remind you about these things occasionally. And so Jupiter is in an important part of your chart. Jupiter in Cancer is about success. It's about making the absolute most of what you've got. It's about moving forward. It's about how you are creating this path forward. And with Mars making a trine to Jupiter, and the Moon also making a sextile, it seems that by the end of the weekend, by Sunday, you're starting to see how things are moving, how things are coming together, and what kind of action you can take. And it's not just about the weekend; it's about thinking forward to the week ahead, and it's really about being quite disciplined and making sure that you are properly prepared. And that might well be how Mars trine Jupiter works. It's about just good preparation. Good luck doesn't just come your way. It has to be prepared for. And so if you've got plans for next week, then this weekend you can put your energy into thinking about how you can make them happen, and what kind of preparations you need to take. Though you could be helped by another person, the right other person. Which other person? I mean, yeah, some people are deceptive, but just because some people are deceptive, some people don't make their intentions clear, doesn't mean they are up to no good. That's not necessarily the case. And someone who is dynamic, but also quite disciplined and straightforward. It's that kind of person you need in your life at the moment, and maybe that Mars trine Jupiter will attract such a person. But if no one exists, I think just that Mars trine Jupiter just is about you doing some really useful work over the weekend, and if you get it right, that could mean that as you move into the new week, by Monday, perhaps when the moon changes sign, when the moon moves into Aquarius, you'll start to see the first fruits. So, yeah, perhaps a degree of preparation is going to be important. Scorpio. Mars is trine Jupiter. Mars trine Jupiter, well, that is the main aspect of the weekend. And Mars rules Scorpio, and it's trine Jupiter. So if we interpret that aspect literally, we could say that it's pretty fortunate. It represents things that are moving, things are happening, things are unfolding, and you have the capacity to really get things together on many different levels. And I don't think, Scorpio, you want to have a quiet weekend. I think you want to have a weekend which is filled with activity, but not activity just for the sake of it. Thinking about what it is that you want, and that might have a material side to it. If you have particular desires, every Scorpio has desires. I mean, desire is a word that one associates with Scorpio. It's almost a Scorpio keyword, but it could be about moving things to a new level, because it links with Jupiter. I mean, Jupiter is the planet of moving on, getting a perspective. I mean, getting a wider perspective, not being caught up with trivia. And so with Mars trine Jupiter, it can be about you seeing what it is all about. You can focus on one thing or another thing, these small tasks that seem pretty meaningless in themselves, but when you get the broader picture, you start to see how it's connected. And it might be, Scorpio, about you having to sort of symbolically get onto the mountaintop, get above the clouds, and see everything, see for hundreds of miles around, if that mountain is high enough. So you see the landscape, and you see where you are in it all. Because if you're working from the ground, it's very subjective. You're distracted by your subjectivity. Everything just seems a bit too personal. But when you see yourself in the wider scheme of things, that actually makes you feel and realize that you can go beyond space and time. Okay, that sounds a bit ridiculous, going beyond space and time, but I think we're talking about what is eternal, and that's part of what being a Scorpio is all about. It is about the mysteries of life and death, and this Mars trine Jupiter could at best give you a meaning. And a meaning which is, being guided by something that goes beyond yourself. And there could be just moments where you see it. It's like flashes of inspiration, flashes where the mundane just separates, and you're in a new world. It's a world that's very real. But it's not real at all. So there could be those kind of moments where you see things at a new and sort of elevated level. And we do have a grand trine today in water signs if we look hard enough. And that grand trine involves true black moon Lilith. So we've got true black moon Lilith at 17 degrees 46 Scorpio. Now, when you're talking about black moon Lilith, it does depend what black moon Lilith you use. I know a lot of people use mean black moon Lilith. I think tables for mean black moon Lilith are more available than tables for true black moon Lilith. In fact, it's quite difficult to find tables for true black moon Lilith. But you can find the positions of true black moon Lilith if you look hard enough. But there is a difference, and the difference between true black moon Lilith and mean black moon Lilith can be enormous. I think it can be they can be over a sign apart. But I prefer to use true black moon Lilith, even though true black moon Lilith can be very erratic. It can have huge movements, relatively speaking. And anyway, true black moon Lilith is at 17 Scorpio. Mars is at 15 Pisces, Jupiter's at 15 Cancer. So we've got a grand trine involving true black moon Lilith, and that true black moon Lilith is in Scorpio. So this kind of adds to the picture, Scorpio, that you can get in tune with whatever that true black moon Lilith means. I mean, true black moon Lilith is quite an intense, dark force. I mean, it seems perhaps dangerous because it's hidden, and very often, as soon as something is brought out into the light, it becomes clearer. I mean, one never wants to bring true black moon Lilith out into the light, because that is not of the nature of true black moon Lilith. And if you're a Scorpio, you understand that some things have to be kept to yourself. But I think that this Mars trine Jupiter does encourage you to get in touch with that true black moon Lilith, though true black moon Lilith can be something of a temptress. It could be, in certain instances, that this grand trine encourages you to do something which is unwise. It might be very interesting, very exciting, but it could be dangerous. So you don't want to do that with this grand trine. But if you use the grand trine positively, it allows you to really get in touch with who you are, with that inner constructive darkness, and maybe put it into practice, but put it into practice in such a way that everyone benefits, and in particular you benefit. Sagittarius. there is now some fire. I mean, there's a lot of fire now. I mean, we've got Sun and Venus and Saturn and Neptune in Aries, and so things really have changed. Not so long ago, we had loads of planets in Pisces, and those Piscean planets, they were being pretty overwhelming. But now that these Pisces planets have shifted, they've gone into Aries. You're starting to feel that there are real possibilities, that you're finding yourself, you're finding your groove, and you're feeling sort of more inspired, more energetic. Particularly having the Sun in Aries. After the equinox, the Sun is an important planet, obviously. And the Aries season has started, and perhaps you're starting to understand, what makes you special, what makes you creative, what you can actually do if you give yourself a chance. So you might be, really ready to go, especially as Mars is making a trine to Jupiter. So Jupiter, your ruler, exalted in Cancer. Mars trine Jupiter, it's something you want to do, but what actually should you be doing? I mean, I don't think, Sagittarius, that you should necessarily be trying to do something completely over the top. I don't think you should be wanting to sort of draw huge amounts of attention to yourself. Not yet. It is part of a process. And in the short term, at least this weekend, work on yourself. That's where you should be putting your energy. You know what you can do. You've got time. You know that this is just the beginning of a stage where where things are happening. And in these first few days of this new stage, you don't want to be in too much of a hurry. I mean, if you were to rush forward, you could trip up, and instead just take it easy to an extent. I mean, I'm not saying you be lazy. It's not a lazy weekend with Mars trine Jupiter, but just make sure you start on the right footing. And if you don't start on the right footing, obviously you could do yourself an injury. And additionally, we got Moon in Taurus. Moon in Taurus over the weekend, it does slow things down. I mean, it's quite a slow placement for the Moon. I mean, it's a good placement for the Moon. I mean, the Moon is exalted in Taurus, but just make sure that everything is properly established and grounded. I know you've heard enough about grounding and making sure that everything is secure, but I think the Moon is going to help give you that security. I mean, the Moon makes a sextile to Jupiter, makes a sextile to Mars. Of course, Jupiter is, as I've just said, is obviously your ruler. So Moon sextile Jupiter, it's fortunate, but it's fortunate in quite a slow and deliberate kind of way. And so, we've got all these planets in the fire signs, but it doesn't mean you have to set everything on fire. It doesn't mean you have to explode everything. No, it is just a beginning. And what matters is how you actually feel. It's that inner confidence. You have that inner confidence, and you should rest assured that over the next few weeks, things really are going to start moving for you. Capricorn. It's not a bad weekend. I mean, I don't think that Saturn, your ruler, is particularly highlighted at the moment. I mean, I think it will be. I mean, in a few days' time, at the beginning of next week, the Sun makes a conjunction to Saturn. But over the weekend, you can feel that to an extent. But I don't think it's what really matters. Instead, this weekend, I mean, I think that you can make your own choices. And I think that you're going to enjoy the fact that the moon is in Taurus. And the moon is making some good aspects in Taurus. Okay, it starts the weekend. The weekend starts with the moon making a square to Pluto, which could be a bit troublesome. Maybe the weekend starts with you being bothered by something. Maybe it's something related to finance, but I don't think it will last long. But because the moon moves on, and the moon makes a sextile to Mercury, trine, makes a trine, sextile Jupiter, sextile Mars. So the moon makes a number of fortunate aspects, and I think that those aspects are going to allow you to do things, to say things, to make your presence felt in quite a gentle way, and also to enjoy yourself. I mean, I think it can be quite an enjoyable weekend. If there's something you want to do, with this moon in Taurus, I think you can do it. And it's also the fact that the moon is in an earth sign. There is some grounding here, and so if you want to do something involved with the earth and the soil, something you enjoy doing, then I would have said go ahead. You do something that is grounding, but which is also enjoyable, and so that is something that you can certainly do, and you might find that the right people can be grounding. Because your ability to your ability to communicate about important things is good. When I say important things, I'm not talking about things that are heavy. Just topics of conversation that do actually appear to be going somewhere. We're not just talking about hot air. And with moon sextile Jupiter, that indicates a real connection there. A connection between you and someone else, and that's what you should perhaps be thinking about. So ideally, you would not spend the weekend alone, not entirely alone, and you would really see what other people have got to offer. Now, part of you thinks that some kind of change is required. I think you've been feeling that for some time, and you know what change is required. But I think you also know that it's going to take a long time. And I think I talked about this, when I did my video for, was it Thursday or Friday? I think it was the Friday. There's just this feeling that a change is required, but no one's ready for it. I mean, you might be ready, but no one else is. So if you are talking to people, don't put too much pressure on them. I mean, they're holding back, they're dragging their feet, but it's just they're not quite ready, and you are ahead of the pack. And in the end, Capricorn, I think that people will come round to your way of thinking. Aquarius, you don't have to do anything especially dramatic if you don't want to. I mean, Saturn is your ruler, and Saturn is not right now strongly configured. I think it will be, but the Sun has just moved into Aries. The Sun is going to make a conjunction to Saturn, soon enough. But that Sun-Saturn conjunction is not of immediate importance. Certainly the beginning of a weekend. I think, by the end of a weekend, that Sun-Saturn conjunction is starting to get quite close. And so that might have an influence. And the question is, what is this Sun-Saturn conjunction about? I think that the Sun-Saturn conjunction, if it's about anything, could be about relationships. As I said, I think on Friday, Saturn is you, Sun represents someone maybe moving your way, and that Sun-Saturn conjunction is exact. I don't know, Monday, Tuesday, something like that. So don't completely sort of ignore the possibility that someone does want your attention. Someone is getting closer to you, and someone wants something. Whether or not you want to give them the time of day, well, that's up to you. But it's important, I think, to give people a chance, to give people a chance to state their case. And some Aquarians this weekend, they might not want to interact at all. The moon is making a square to Pluto. I mean, that's how the weekend starts. I mean, the moon in Taurus making a square to Pluto in Aquarius. So that might be your general view of the weekend on Saturday. You don't want to give too much away, and you just want to hold firm and be as independent as possible. However, I think that there is room for sort of easing up a bit. You don't have to be under quite so much pressure. I mean, the moon, sure, it makes a square to Pluto, but it moves on. It makes a sextile to Jupiter. It makes a sextile to Mars. So, as the weekend progresses, I do think that you can start to lighten up, and maybe you have to lighten up, because in order to, if you once you start lightening up, things start to move. Maybe they slowly start to move, but you start to sort of slowly become aware of what is possible, and you perhaps need to incorporate new information, maybe even incorporate new people in your life. And you don't have to. I mean, nothing is compulsory this weekend. But I think that by the end of a weekend, with that moon sextile Mars, moon sextile Jupiter, there is something that you can understand and get hold of, perhaps with another person's help, and there might well be a monetary side to it. So you might not want to be thinking about money over the weekend, but I think that on Sunday you can do some useful work in the financial department, thinking about money, planning money, working money out, and in the process maybe being quite talented about it. You might have an inspiration about what can be done with money, or perhaps you can do something to make things safer for yourself. So there's something going on there of a financial nature that could work in your best interests. I mean, that might not be what you want to hear, but there's also Mars trine Jupiter, and so Mars trine Jupiter is a powerful aspect. I think it's an aspect that, again, it could have a financial nature, and it could work in two ways. If we were to look at Mars trine Jupiter in the worst possible light, you could say it's over agitation, perhaps about money, perhaps about whether or not to buy something. I mean, there is that way of looking at Mars trine Jupiter, just not being very constructive, or even making a financial mistake, buying something you don't need. I mean, that's one way of looking at Mars trine Jupiter, but you could be positive about it, and I think you probably can be positive about it. So Mars trine Jupiter might be about you deciding that your financial situation could be better, should be better, must be better, and being ready to do something about it. And you might make a particular decision relating to money and security, and it might well be the right decision. Pisces. The moon is moving through Taurus. With the moon moving through Taurus, it's not bad. I mean, it's a good place for the moon to be. In fact, the moon joys in Taurus. Well, that's not quite true, because when you hear this word in astrology, joys, people relate to houses, not to signs. But from a Piscean perspective, that is the case, because Taurus is your third house, and traditionally the moon joys in the third house. So Taurus is arguably the best place for the moon to be from a Piscean perspective. You feel comfortable. You feel that you are aware, you are alive, and there are lots of different things you can do. Because the moon doesn't like to stay in one place. I mean, the moon, it moves from one thing to another. It's like the tides, and you enjoy one thing, and then you decide you want to enjoy something else, and you move this way and that way, and it's all very easy and very organic and natural. And the moon in Taurus, it makes some great aspects. It makes a sextile to Mercury. It makes a trine to Jupiter. Sextile to Jupiter makes a sextile to Mars. And so those two remaining planets in Pisces. Mercury is still in Pisces. Mars is in Pisces. North Node as well. And so the moon makes sextiles to all of those planets, and so those sextiles just give you just an ease. You being very just easygoing, and you can move from one place to another just really quickly, one person to another very quickly. So you have a conversation with one person or another person. It's all very smooth, and in the process you don't do anything dramatic. That's not what it's about. You just go with the flow, and your ability to relate and to understand other people, to give people what they want, or at least tell people what they want to hear, is going to be very good. And in fact, by talking about the right things, you can create connections. You can create connections, all over the place. And in many cases, Pisces, it can be a weekend where relationships can be strengthened and perhaps created as well. But it's all very easy going. You don't have to take things too far. Mars is making a trine to Jupiter, and it's a trine. Okay, Mars trine Jupiter. It can be a difficult aspect if you take things too far. I mean, Mars trine Jupiter. The problem with Mars trine Jupiter is there's no resistance. You throw energy into something and it just gets out of hand. And so you don't have to exaggerate. Indeed, you must not exaggerate. Mars trine Jupiter is an active aspect that doesn't really need any help. And so with Mars trine Jupiter, just go with that natural flow, and you'll have all the energy you need. You're almost self-sufficient in energy. It's like kind of hydroelectric power. It's just there. You don't have to enhance anything. You don't have to turn you don't have to turn the dial to maximum. You have what you need, and it's all very smooth and creative, and you can get a lot done, and there can be a lot of understanding there as well, because this Mars trine Jupiter is, it's making a grand trine with true black moon Lilith. Now, I can't tell you what true black moon Lilith means. By that I mean, black moon Lilith means different things to different people. I mean, black moon Lilith it can be quite a scary energy. It is about the night. It's this thing that lurks, this being that lurks in the shadows between one's conscious and unconscious. In dreams, black moon Lilith is particularly powerful, and with Mars trine Jupiter, remember, because Jupiter is your ruler, linked up with true black moon Lilith, that means that you can get in touch with something. And if you get in touch with something, well, it's about integration, isn't it? I mean, that's what it's all about. If we want to be a whole person, we have to bring together everything, including things about ourselves that we don't particularly like, memories from the past, maybe even unpleasant memories from the past. It all has to be brought together. And so with Mars trine Jupiter and Black Moon Lilith linked with it, it is a time to get in touch and to bring things into play, including Black Moon Lilith, in terms of what you are doing and being able to tune into your own power, and tune into your own power very easily. Nothing has to be pushed, nothing has to be forced. And those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. And now it's time to look at the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is the weekend going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 35, which is progress. So it is a weekend where we can make progress. And I think that has actually been a theme when I've been talking about the 12 signs. It's quite a dynamic weekend, but it's also a weekend where we have to be a little careful, because we might have Mars trine Jupiter. It sounds a very high energy aspect, but we've also got Sun conjunct Neptune. So Sun conjunct Neptune, we may not always entirely know what we're doing, and there is certainly the possibility there of getting confused and distracted with Sun conjunct Neptune. So what kind of progress are we talking about? We're certainly in the mood for progress, but to what extent are we going to be able to see it through? And the answer to that is maybe not to a great extent. We have the second line moving. So perhaps with the first line, we see the beginning of progress. Then the second line, then something starts to come to a halt. And we're starting to think, hold on, this is not going right. And it is a situation which kind of starts badly, but doesn't necessarily end badly. So we realize that we haven't got we haven't necessarily got what it takes. Something is much more difficult than we'd imagined. And so we stop what we're doing and we take a breather. It might be that we need outside assistance. We've still got to keep in mind our goals, whatever they are. I mean, we still have things we want to achieve. It's not like we just pack up shop or anything like that. We just have to be aware that we haven't got what it takes to begin with. And then the line moves. So the second line moves. So we move to a second hexagram, and the hexagram we move to is hexagram number 64, which is kind of more of the same. So hexagram 64 is before completion, and the symbol here is of a fox trying to cross the river. It hasn't got there yet. It can see the bank, but it hasn't reached the bank, and that does put the fox in some danger, because if it proceeds, it might get swept away. The water is getting deep. There is the option of returning back, of return, possibly. So consider that. But I think the I Ching is kind of saying with this hexagram, there is a way through, but one has to be very, very careful. And, given the previous hexagram, because the previous hexagram progress does say that in the end things will work, but we just need some pause. So maybe with before completion, it's kind of like there's a little island or somewhere in the middle of a river, and we've got an opportunity to get to this island, and we just stop. May not be much of an island, maybe just a sandbank or whatever, somewhere where we can at least put our feet on the ground or on the riverbed, where we've got a bit of shallow, where we can just stop, wait for the situation to resolve, and then we can continue. So I understand that there are things that need to be done this weekend. Mars trine Jupiter, very dynamic aspect, and we might want to just move ahead. But before completion does indicate, but whatever we're trying to do this weekend, we're not going to quite get there. And there's no harm in pausing. I mean, we could go back to where we started from. I don't think we actually have to do that. But I just think we just have to take stock of things and just be satisfied with what we've achieved so far and just wait for the situation to resolve. I mean, in the end, the situation should be resolved. I mean, one thing that about the previous hexagram progress, it does indicate in the end we will get results. I mean, the previous hexagram talks about having 3 interviews at once, and that's what we're looking for, getting recognized. But we're not there yet, and so that's probably the best way of looking at this weekend. Anyway, that's it. I hope you have a great weekend. If you enjoyed this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description, and I will talk to you again very soon.